Hi, everyone. I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. You found your way to our TLC Professional Development Series, and we're very excited to see you. If you're watching us asynchronously, we're excited to see you at a time of your convenience later. I'd like to remind you that we have a professional development certificate that you can earn. This is all the information is available from our website. My colleagues will also drop that link into the chat. And if you're a faculty member looking to kind of extend other people's teaching excellence, not only your own, you could potentially become a TLC fellow. And then you get to present in our PD series next year. That would be fantastic. That information is also available at that link and on our webpage. And I'd be happy to talk to anyone who has any questions about that. A couple other things I want to kind of put on your radar. We have a TLC Hub. That's our Teams channel. We put out information about lots of different kinds of things, these events, and events that our collaborators do on campus as well. So definitely check that out. Um, we also have our Soto Showcase not that far away from now. So we are about at the mid-semester point, which is kind of blowing my mind. And the Monday of finals week, that day we'll be having an afternoon session of oral presentations and poster presentations of all the cool things that all y'all are doing in the classroom, potentially related to innovative teaching practices and or research on teaching and learning. So we'd love to have you at our Soto Showcase, and we'll keep having you save that date for now. But we're going to have a call for those proposals coming out in the not too distant future. So be looking for that. We have a number of other things that we want to kind of put on your radar real quick, trying to find all the tabs that are open. So there is a drop-in event, really cool drop-in event, March 11th, 2:30 to 4. This is done by our student support and accountability colleagues, and especially if you're a GTA or you work with GTAs or other graduate students and are saying, how do we support our students? How does the student of concern report work? What kind of services does student support and accountability have? Well, they're going to be hanging out in Hale in that coffee area, I believe, on that first floor. And you can pop in and ask them questions. And they are super helpful. And they're definitely people that you want to kind of be acclimating yourself with so we can support our students. So I'll put that on your radar. We got more people popping in. Um, and I think that's our announcements for now in terms of upcoming events, but I'm looking at Jeff for verification. And Jeff says, I think we're good. So I'll let you know that next week we'll be having a really cool presentation by one of our TLC fellows this year, Dr. Alex McVeigh, and he's in the communication department. He'll be talking about debate across the curriculum. I'm very excited for that. I myself am a little bit ambivalent about debate as a technique, and my communication colleagues always tell me, no, no, trust us. There's value in it. So I'm very excited to go and see that next week, and I hope that you'll join us. Today we have a teaching chat, and kind of the theme that I wanted for today's teaching chat is creating fulfilling classes for instructors and students. I want to have a conversation with all of you. I'll have some targeted questions possibly about how it is that we can make our classes really, really awesome for us and then make them awesome for our students because it's March, and it's cold outside, and it's kind of gray and all of that, and it's kind of hard sometimes to keep that head up and keep excited walking into class. So I want to think about some proactive things we can do to make that place that oasis that we can escape from the rest of life from and make that fantastic for us and our students. So we'll get there in a second. But as we always do for the teaching chats, I want to kind of open it up if anyone had any questions or issues or concerns. I'd like to kind of bounce off our colleagues, and I'll shut up and wait to see if anyone has them. And if you want to drop them in the chat, I can read them out loud for you and kind of facilitate that conversation, or you can just unmute. All right. So I'm not seeing any questions or concerns. It doesn't mean you don't have any. It doesn't mean you can't chime in later, and it doesn't mean you can't contact me offline. But I'll kind of hit you with some of the questions that I sort of have. So, what makes the classroom awesome? What are the things that kind of really make us feel good and energized and fulfilled as teachers? And as my students know, none of my questions are rhetorical.
Mm, When you build like classroom community, it feels awesome seeing them come in on the first few days and they are all to themselves and by themselves. And by the time the semester ends, you see that they've made great friends from the class and even carry on after the semester or the class has ended.
Nice. So when we experience classroom community, you're saying that's going to make us feel fulfilled as teachers. Excellent. That's a great start. What else?
I get really motivated seeing my students connect their own interests to what we're doing in class. And so when I see them really individualize and like add their personality to what we're doing, and I feel like it along with what Karamatu says, it makes for that strong class community. It makes for an enriching environment. And also it's just really exciting to see my course content through other people's eyes, and like, oh, I had never considered it that way, or like, oh, that's such a cool way to apply this knowledge. So I get really excited when it's not just like, this is what I tell you and this is what you're giving me, like the same thing, but like interpreted in a different way.
Excellent. So you're saying when our students take the information, they do something personal with it in terms of the application. Love that. That's fantastic. And for any of you who just joined us, what we're doing, our kind of theme for today is kind of making teaching fulfilling for us and our students. And what we're doing now is talking about some of the things that make us feel fulfilled while we're teaching. So what else do we have? Yeah, Carrie.
Um, I like to find topics that I'm really excited about and then share it with them. And I try to come up with like discussion questions. And I also really like it when um, like they ask lots of questions. So, which they can only do if there's community and these other things. But when like those classes where you're so into the topic, they don't even realize that the time is gone. Those are my favorite classes.
Excellent. So, you have a kind of situation, you're bringing the stuff you're interested in, and they're so interested, they're asking questions, they're feeling comfortable. They have experience what psychologists call time absorption. That time just goes by. We have that flow state. That's awesome. I have that happen in one of my classes, especially because there's no clock. So it's just, you just kind of lose track of time, literally. Kara Matu is my TA for that class, and it's always like, oh, wow, we're out of time. And that's kind of a cool feeling. What else kind of leads to those feelings of fulfillment while we're teaching?
I like helping students solve problems. It doesn't really matter what the problem is, especially if I'm just kind of guiding them towards finding their own answer. That's the best. But even today, so today's topic for class was on research. So this is an arts and sciences orientation class, and students are usually not super excited about learning about how to do research better. But I started the class by asking them, what do you like, love, dislike, or despise about research? Talk with classmates and then share those. And I would have predicted, I think, most of the answers, but some were it takes a long time, it's really difficult, kind of stuff. But there were also some positive ones, like it helps you develop a relationship with professors if it's outside of class, or it gives you a chance to learn about and apply things. And so then throughout the whole rest of the class, it felt more engaging, I think, to them as well as to me, that as I was showing them things, I could say, this is a way for you to save time. This is a way for you to make it less difficult. Like I showed them the chat with a librarian feature, looked up a New York Times article and said, there's a paywall here. So I'm going to tell this librarian on the chat, hey, there's this article in New York Times I want, can you help me find it? And then the librarian gave us a link and we got it. And I said, you could look for this yourself on a database if you want to, but this is a shortcut and librarians are there to help. That's their job. They want to help you find things. So find something on a random Google search and you want the actual credible article, ask a librarian for help. Or we looked at the scholarly development and undergraduate research page under the Staley School. And I said, if you want to do research, but you don't know how, start here. This is how you get letters of recommendation, whether you're going to grad school or getting a job. This is how the professor knows more about you than it being in your class. And so it was just really nice to be able to kind of make things more accessible for them, but also to just solve their problems of saving time and making it easier. Like, go to a lab. Has anyone worked with a subject librarian on a research paper? No? Okay, well, make it like take that 30 minutes to an hour to make that meeting. It is going to save you so many hours of time later. So I could really just kind of, instead of saying you should do this, I could really relate it to their questions and concerns. And so it just felt like I'm helping them instead of I'm making sure they know this.
That is fantastic. You're teaching people to fish. That's amazing.
I love doing that with students, Melissa, having, telling them that like, no, actually like using the resource librarians and going and asking questions, you're going to get the work done way faster and way better. And to couch it that way, I feel like, there were years where I would be like, it's a really good idea to go talk to a research librarian. And they're kind of like, yeah, yeah. As soon as you like put it in ways that it's like, no, no, this is going to make your life so much easier. I was amazed at how many of my students actually made appointments with our resource librarian. It's like, yay.
Because they'll be like, I don't have time to do that. I'm like, you don't actually have time not to. You're going to save yourself. That's great.
So what each of you kind of talked about is you have students who are playing the game with you, right? They're doing the things you're asking, they're achieving, they're demonstrating their learning, they're taking your recommendations for finding all this stuff. So what do we need to do in our classes to get them to be willing partners in those kinds of things?
Be trustworthy.
Okay. So how do we be trustworthy? Because one of the things that I talk about, like in my principal college teaching classes, is not enough that we are the thing. They have to know we are the thing. So how is it that we show them we're trustworthy?
Well, I would say showing that, what we say is actually like what's going to happen. So in the case of like, if you meet with a resource librarian, it's going to save you time and you're going to be able to do it better. And then they meet with the resource librarian and it saves them time and they're able to do it better. When we say, this is how we're going to evaluate you, that we actually follow through and that that's the way that we evaluate them, making connections and showing interest in our students and showing them that like, yes, when you do this, this is going to help you professionally. And saying things that are actually accurate, right? About like what the real world is like. This is something that I've found. I have a high schooler, and a lot of times he comes home being like, my teacher said that in college, professors are never going to let you turn in things late. And I'm just like, and he's like, and I know that's not true. I'm like, there are professors that won't allow you to turn in things late, but not all professors. And so I think making sure that we offer nuance when we're saying things that like oftentimes you'll see this, these in these kinds of cases, this has been my experience, rather than give blanket statements of like, this is how it is in the real world. Like, this has been my experience in the real world.
I think that's an important point, Andy. One of the things that has sometimes bothered me is when those of us who went to college and never left talk about the real world. Right? It's like I don't know how much of the real world I actually know. So I think offering those qualifiers and being realistic is a great way to kind of build that we're trustworthy and someone who could be trusted because we're not feigning knowledge we don't have. So I really appreciate that point. So what else can we do to get our students to come along for these rides and be our willing collaborators?
I feel like showing our own passion and enthusiasm for whatever we are teaching and talking about. And I like the example Melissa gave with research, sometimes teaching research, students don't really like it that much. And I remember one of the things you spoke about is don't tell them, hey, this is a really hard or boring topic to discuss today, and then kind of completely make them shut off their minds from whatever you're going to teach them that day. So be passionate and enthusiastic about, like, bring the energy to the room.
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna follow up on that because this is a question we actually had from a couple of our graduate students in the class that Kara Matu and I are working together. Is what if you don't naturally have kind of an energetic, extroverted personality? How do you bring the energy in that case?
I think sometimes word choice, like it's okay if you're not bubbly or smiling or, moving around like this. Students can also tell just by the words that you choose. It's okay if you are serious or quiet or calm or those kinds of things, through that. I also think they can tell if you relate what's going on to them, both, especially if it's both short-term and long-term engagement. So for my research topic today, just to stick with that example, they have a research assignment. It's mostly how to do research. It's not like a big project, but I connected what we were doing in class to that. So it was also showing you're here in class, so you're going to be farther ahead on this assignment than people who aren't here today. There was one that at one point I said, you know what? You can take a picture of the screen and you can use what we came up with in class for this. I'm giving you permission to do that. It was just one tiny little portion of the thing. Like, how do you define a database? You know what? We have a great definition. Take a picture and use it if you want. You can write your own if you want. But then also connecting it to their long-term goals. So that's kind of going off topic of what you asked on a little bit, but I think that
These chats
just
go off topics all the time. That's all good.
it's just good to go back to your question, to show enthusiasm, even telling them, hey, this is research I do outside of class. So one of the things I showed them today, I actually used Natalie Bartlett as an example because I knew she would have stuff on her page, but I pulled up her personal page and showed students, have you ever looked up your professors? If they are like faculty, unlike me as staff, they're going to have a page that shows their research interests. Read it. Ask them some questions, even if they're in your department and you don't have a class with them. And so I think that you can do that yourself if you're a professor who has research interests in pages. Like you can talk about what you do outside of class, and they'll know you care about it if you're putting time into it outside of class, just like them. Whatever they don't have to do matters to them. So you can talk about your own research and stuff if it connects to what you're doing as well.
That is fantastic. I think one of the things I'll amplify that you said earlier in that statement is we don't always have to do it with the display of emotion to show that we're engaged in something. We can do it with the things that we say. So you can say, hey, I'm about to share with you one of my favorite studies I've ever read, or this next part is really important and I want you to lock in on this. There are other ways to do it besides saying, this is gonna be amazing, right there. You don't have to always do it with the overtop emotionality. But I think some students have a hard time with that. And I also kind of want to point out something that we also got a little bit of resistance back in one of my classes is I think we can do this in every class. I think we can, a STEM class, a humanities class, an arts class, social science class, whatever. I think we can do it in all those classes. I think kind of saying these are interesting things, these are worthwhile things, these are things that I'm excited about, these are things that are going to apply for this and that reason. Those are things we can do in every class. They don't take a whole lot of time, but I think it is, well worth the couple of seconds it takes to get your students a little bit more engaged. So just in case anyone has a resistance to that, I'm not hearing that resistance. I think we can do it. And Kara, you unmuted. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I think you can structure your class in a certain way. So I do very specific structuring that I've been working on, but like I intentionally start my class with a reset. And I think that reset can be anything that fits your personality. But for me, I do mindfulness Mondays, I do well-being Wednesdays, and I do favorites Fridays. And I am hoping multiple things will happen. Like we'll build community. I'll teach them how to increase their mental health. I tell them, I'm showing them how important I think that is for them to learn, but also giving them different tools that they can use outside of the classroom. But it's a way for us to be in that moment together. And I make them put their devices away. So even if they don't want to participate that today, we're device free. And on Mondays, we turn the lights out, sometimes Wednesdays, but while we do it. And it's just like for the first 1 to 5 minutes. But even in a 15-minute class, it changes the dynamic of the class completely. And then when I end the class, I end with a minute paper, which you could call an exit ticket. But I ask for a comment, a question, or something they learned. And every single day, I respond to those students. So they know that if they had questions about the material or they want to talk about, they want me to talk about something that they were too afraid to ask in like Gen Psych, so they see that I'm consistently caring about their ideas, even if they were too afraid to talk in class. So generally, I think that shows you can show energy that way. Like, and honestly, I have been bubbly. I can have a bubbly personality, but there are moments in life and days of your life where the bubble isn't there. So I think I can still be excited without it, like the excitement coming out of my face, right? Like we're all bringing, like, so Dawn's oasis is what I try to work toward. And I don't have to be like in a good place to get to the oasis. Like, in fact, that's the whole point, is that you leave what's causing you problems outside of the classroom, which is why I moved toward that reset, because I was having really big outside life issues. So anyway.
Okay, I'm going to follow up a couple things just to amplify some of what you're saying. So You had mindfulness Mondays, favorites Fridays. What was the Wednesday again?
Oh, just well-being Wednesday.
Well-being.
So
Okay.
on Monday we do different mindfulness techniques, groundings, breathings, visualizations. On Wednesday I use the positive psych stuff I've learned, which the mindfulness stuff counts into that. But we do different things like compliment your neighbor in a not creepy way, and then like a self compliment. Right? They love that so much, and then like just other little things like that, like what's a small win you've had, and then you can share it with a neighbor if you want. So, and then on Fridays we say things that are our favorite. So like I try to sometimes tie it into the class because I do it in all my classes. But sometimes it's like they really like childhood. So one day we did, what was your favorite? Oh, it was nice outside. What's your favorite thing to do outside? And what was your favorite thing to do at recess in elementary school? They love
And I just want to also point out that you're not talking about a class that's focused on positive psych. You're talking about this is the thing that gets them introduced to any class. So kind of
it.
keeping
Yeah.
with this theme of like general
Yeah.
practices we can do in almost anything, you go
Yes.
in 30 seconds to getting your students reset for any class you
Yes.
could be teaching.
So large Bluemont 101 Gen Psych research method. I did it in personality, which is an upper level. I had teach history of psych this semester. Doesn't matter. It
Excellent.
I don't think it matters, but I do think you have to be true to your personality. Like if you're worried about the mindfulness stuff, don't do it. You know, I was worried, mind you, and I still tried it and it worked out, and the students really do love it.
So yeah, I'm just pointing out that, this is something any of us can do because I know sometimes when I have these conversations with colleagues, be like, I don't teach one of those warm fuzzy classes. We're talking research methods. We're not talking like a necessarily a warm fuzzy class. We're talking any class could potentially include this. Excellent.
I like that a lot, especially because recently I was teaching in my grad class. We were talking about kind of research ethics, and how do we approach our research in a way that's mindful and ethical and appropriate, IRB, all of that kind of stuff. And honestly, like it's not warm, bubbly, fun content. And so I started the class by saying, like, listen, like this is not content that makes my heart sing, but I do believe that it's really important. And so I think that like finding ways that even, I like Don and Karamatu said, like, don't go in and be like, this is going to be boring. But it's okay to also like be real about how you feel about things. Yeah, I get bogged down having to do all the ethical stuff. But I do believe that it's really important. And so like let's look at why it's important and let's lean into the part that like why we need to do the less fun stuff because it's important. But I think that, Carrie, to your point, being really authentic to yourself and showing your students that you care in whatever way that looks like. I've had a number of instructors that I would describe their energy in class as very like calm, quiet energy, which is very much not the energy that I bring to a classroom. And I think that all types of energy are really positive, that students will uh, gravitate towards the one that works for them. And I've definitely had students on TVALs say like, your energy's a little much. It's a little too much to deal with. I'm like, yeah, sorry, that's kind of how I am. But there are other students that appreciate that. And so instead of trying to chase what you think students are going to want or what you think is like the good positive energy, like finding your way to express like why did you get into this topic, like why did you follow this discipline, why am I passionate about that, and then just share that with your students.
I love all of that. I want to point out that Cheryl put in the comments a little bit ago that you can add humor to your material. So you can actually use your material to bring the bubble that Carrie was talking about before. And if you're looking for like ways to do that, I'll point out that one of our presentations at the end of the fall semester that you can look at our webpage by Andy Lopez Kaler was making learning memorable through humor, and talked about memes and those sorts of things that we can include to make that humor pop, and using that as kind of an interactive thing where the students can kind of be kind of crowdsourcing that for you, to both demonstrate their learning and increase the creative reach of what you're doing. So I love those. Clarissa, you had like turned your video on like 25 minutes ago and we didn't get you yet. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to chime in if you wanted to.
Oh, I was eating lunch and I just worked out, so I look kind of gross. I was just thinking, this semester what's worked for me is two things, and I probably have done them other semesters and didn't think about it. The first week of class, I told them like I have office hours, and I'm like, just come on by and talk if you want. I'm like, I might seem like an awkward person, but I'm gonna try really hard. I'm gonna be super nice. And we'll get through it. And I've had students actually just stop by my office when they're passing by just to say hi, and then I can ask them a few questions and get to know them. And so then they'll also do that before and after class now a little bit more than they used to as well. So that's been helpful because I tell them I'm an introvert and I'm trying, but like I'll stand up in front of class and not talk to people for the first few minutes unless they want to come up and talk to me. And then on topics, like when I really like something, I'll tell them like I'm going to nerd out today because I really like what we're going to do. And if you want to get your nerd on, you can like whenever you want. Or like yesterday, I had to teach how to write job descriptions. I'm like, this is rather dry and boring, and I actually really hate this topic, but you guys are going to do it at work. So that's why we're going to learn it. And I've had to do it every year when I had my evaluations. So at least being honest with them, I'm trying to make this fun, even if it doesn't seem that way. But it's a really useful skill, has been helpful for students to open up and at least see that I don't love everything I teach either, but it's okay. Like there's a use for everything in our class.
I love the authenticity you're kind of talking about there is we're not role playing. We're not play acting what do we think a professor should be. We're accentuating the parts of our personality that are going to help us do the job well. I'm also an introvert. My students are kind of very surprised to sometimes hear me tell them that. And I'll tell them, the definition of introvert, at least from Carl Jung, is it's where energy goes, right? So in social interaction, I expend energy. An extrovert collects energy in those interactions. So I will give you everything I have for the 50 minutes to 75 minutes, and then I go to my office and die. That's what happens. And I think kind of letting them know that, like just saying, that's how much I care about this experience. I'm gonna give you all the energy that I have because I think it's gonna help you learn. But that's gonna be hard for me sometimes. And I think on those days where, Carrie said the bubble isn't there, maybe it makes a little bit more sense, right? That they're saying, oh, well, this guy's an introvert, once in a while he might come in and be a little bit lower in terms of that energy. Um, but I did want to follow up on the days those bubbles are not there. What do we do to get the bubble there? What do we do to kind of maximize the bubble? And I'm stealing that, Carrie, from here on out. Like it's the bubble. So how do we maximize the bubble?
Can I ask a question before we go there, Dawn? I
Sure.
wanted to follow up on something Carrie said because you mentioned you have a device free. Is it just on Mondays or all the time? And then my main question is, how do you get them to do that? Because I try to do the same thing. So today in class, I just said, all right, we're going to get started. Put your laptops and phones away. You won't need them today. We're going to, blah, blah, blah. And most of them did. And yay, today a lot of them were already just talking to each other, which is great. But two of them didn't, and of course they're one sitting in the back row. And so I didn't make a big deal of it. But then later on, they still hadn't put them away. And I said, thanks for putting laptops away. There's a couple of you in the back haven't put them away. Please go ahead and put those away. And I just usually students at that point will, but occasionally have students where I'm like, I feel like twice, any more than twice. And like I've said it, they've heard me, they're just not going to do it. And so this is a question for you, Carrie, since you do this, but for anyone who has insight, what are your thoughts and philosophies? What are your strategies for, I try to just then make the class engaging so that eventually they will ignore the laptop and phone. Like that's the role I can play. But what are your thoughts on this if you have students who are directly resistant to being off of devices or even who are directly resistant to partner or small group discussion? I always give my students permission to pass if I call on them to share in front of the class. Like that's fine. But when it's turn to your partner and talk, I'm like, everybody can do that. So that's kind of my question. How do you deal with that kind of stuff?
Um, I'm gonna go first and then I actually have to go teach. But so at the very beginning of class is the only time in most classes that I have them put their devices away. But I gave them I went into great detail about how important it is to be disconnected from technology. I talk about all of the information they're constantly being bombarded with. We talk about neurotransmitters. I give them a foundation for why it's important. And then honestly, I will say, no one has to participate in that reset, but you need to put your technology away for your brain and your mental well-being. And then I just wait. And the peer pressure, because I won't continue until they put it away. And I don't treat them like high schoolers, but I just don't go on. And I'll be like, oh, just a couple of you still have your laptops open, or make sure you take your headphones off, or and then I have had classes where I say we're not going to have any devices today, but I will tell them the before, like the class before, to give them that expectation. And then again, and I tell them why. And so usually when they know why, they're much more willing to go along with it. I loved You Can't Do That on Television because I definitely watch that all the time. And Slime would be a lovely. I am gonna make sure my schedule never overlaps with the TLC again. Teaching at 12:30 is the worst, but I have to go teach history of psych. It was very fun. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Carrie. So I'm gonna point out that Cheryl put into the chat like when we're kind of like, what about that student didn't engage or didn't put their device away, and said maybe sometimes just leave them alone and engage those who are engaging. Karen Matu has heard me say this 1,000 times, right? Is when I'm in class and my students aren't engaged, I play a game, and that's to try to engage the most disengaged student. So I come in and, I'll pick on Karamatu just because she's the one who made me think, right? So if Karamatu's not engaging, it's like, I'm going to try to be relevant to Karamatu today. I'm going to try to be so engaging, so valuable, so interesting, so informative that Karamatu is going to look up from her laptop, right? And sometimes I win that game and sometimes I don't. But I found that just takes off like the sting a little bit for me because earlier in my career I'd take it personally, right? Like, why is this person coming to class and they're doing something else? And that would kind of hurt me. And I found that didn't put me into a really good space to teach. So what happened is I tried to turn in this game. It became fun. It became a little bit more of an activity for me. And it was a way that I kind of managed some of my emotions in that situation. And what I find is even if I lose that game, Karen Matu doesn't look up, all the other students had a better experience because I tried to bring my A game the whole time for engagement. And I also kind of remind myself that if Karen Matu comes to class and she doesn't engage, it's better than if she didn't come to class. Because if she didn't come to class, I have no chance of teaching Karen Matu. But if she comes, she's given me that opportunity. So it's not where I would like the student to be, but it gives me that shot. So these are things that I try to do myself kind of on the inside to kind of make that class better for me and better for my students. And Rick, I see you just kind of opened up your video. So I wonder if you want to chime in.
No, I just wanted to share an anecdote.
Oh,
Well, the
please.
one time I almost got pissed off at a student who was staring into their laptop. Background, I record my lectures and I post my lectures online. And I'm annoyed at the student who's not paying attention to, I'm giving a really great lecture. Student's got his eyes on the screen. So I walk around back and see what is actually on the student's laptop. And it's me. He's watching me give the same lecture from last semester.
That student was hyper engaged. And that's a really good point, is that sometimes when the students aren't doing what we think they should be doing, they're doing something else that really is improving their learning. I'd gone to a talk a really long time ago. I won't be able to give you a citation or anything for this, but the speaker said that they were talking about students talking in class. And they said a lot of people were, if Melissa and Andy are whispering in the back or something like that, they're like, you all need to, pay attention and get back up here. And they did research on this and they found that like something like 90 or 95% of those conversations are about the material. So what happens is you said something and Melissa said, "Oh, I have a really cool example." And Andy says, "Oh, that's really cool." So they're actually talking about and applying the material. They're moving up Bloom's taxonomy rather than actually being disengaged and off topic. And what this person kind of recommended, rather than saying, "Hey, Melissa and Andy, you need to stop," you say, "Does anyone have any questions or any experiences they'd like to share?" Often those students who are chatting then speak up to the rest of the class. So kind of given that opportunity and realizing there might be something else going on might be kind of cool to do too. Now, Rick, I'll share a quick anecdote too. I do a lot of teaching observations. So I'll sit in the back of class and watch people teach and I give them feedback. And there was this one time where I was watching the class and the person in front of me was on YouTube and they were watching videos of people on fire. And I don't care who you are, you're going to watch that video. So actually, my observation was like, there's about a 15-minute span where I don't know what you did because the person in front of me was watching people burn on fire. And that just was too distracted. I couldn't pay attention. And that's why when I kind of talk about my policies for my class, you don't have the right to distract another student. Right. You can do whatever you want yourself and I'll live. But if you're doing something that now Melissa and Carissa can't pay attention, well, now I have to kind of get involved and get everybody back on task.
This is why I come to these things. Y'all have such good insights, and I've seen some in the chat too. So just remembering that I try to think of all the nuances, but I don't remember all of them. So I appreciate it. And I have an insight that I learned from a student this semester that I hadn't heard before. A student came and talked to me, and she's not in my class. I have a different relationship with her, but she shared that she struggles sometimes to focus in class, and she has ADHD. And what happens to her is that she gets to class and then she realizes, oh my gosh, I haven't eaten anything or had anything to drink. And then she has this, and she's a very invested student. She has this internal dilemma of, if I sit here and listen to class for the next 50 minutes or however long, I'm going to be thinking I need something to eat or drink the entire time. I'm not going to be able to focus. And then, but if I leave, it's going to take me 5 or 10 minutes and then I'm going to miss stuff entirely. What do I do? And she's kind of in this battle here. So we talked about some strategies, but for my part as an instructor, what that gave me was I used to get really annoyed. I never said anything because it's their decision and they're adults, but when students would just get up and leave class for 5 minutes. And I thought, it's a 50-minute class. Like, take care of stuff before or after, knowing they might also have a physical need that's happening that they really just have to attend to it right then. And that's just kind of how life works. And that's okay. It got to be kind of a problem one semester where it was like half the class would leave for 5 minutes at one point. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but it kind of felt like this is just high school, an excuse to leave kind of a thing. But hearing her insight, it gave that to me differently. I thought students might just be getting up to do something, but they might actually be leaving so that they then can actually focus better. And they're not purposefully showing up to class going, I'm just going to leave for 5 minutes in the middle of the class. They may have not realized it because she's like, I don't realize that I need something to drink. I forget to get something to drink. And then all of a sudden, that's all I can think about. And for her, that was kind of one of the ways that ADHD presented itself for her. So just kind of that whole topic of there's almost always something else going on that you don't know, whether it's people on fire in a video where they're watching you give a different lecture, but it's you and they're hyper engaged, or they're actually talking about the subject you're talking about. There's almost always something else.
Yeah, I really appreciate you kind of adding that in there. And to go along with that point too, Cheryl dropped in the chat, some students actually learn well with distraction. Said, kind of believe it or not. I have some students who learn better when they're doodling, right? And others don't. Others that would take us, completely away from what it is that we're doing. So I think sometimes we just got to kind of understand there are going to be some of these idiosyncrasies that are not meant disrespectfully. It's not meant to kind of barrier to their education or any of those kind of things. It's just how that person kind of does it. I had recently talked to a teacher about my son at one of these parent-teacher conferences, and he said, my son is one of those rare people who can actually multitask. He can have a side conversation with someone and learn, but unfortunately, the person he's having the side conversation with can't learn and those kind of things. So it's kind of like you got to kind of take into account what everybody's needs are when we're kind of setting up these situations. Some students get to stay awake, not because they're bored, they're just tired, or get up to stay awake, not because they're bored or just tired. Yeah, so I remember like my sleep habits as an undergraduate, like, I wasn't winning any awards for sleep hygiene. So I would get my butt to class, but sometimes I was doing the nod the whole time, right? So I definitely could have seen if I had the option of getting up and walking around or getting a drink of water or something like that, that could have helped me. And I didn't want to make my professors think I wasn't paying attention or was being disengaged, but sometimes biology is an issue.
Can I just say I'm impressed that you all even notice this stuff because I do not notice my students coming in and out of class. I also have a near lunch class, and I know some of my students are coming from across campus, and I'll have students apologize for leaving class or leaving early. And I'm like, I don't notice anything. Like, you are an adult, you go do your thing. I'm not noticing, like, I'm so focused on what I have to do in the classroom. I don't even notice at all. And I like that they are apologizing, but I'm just impressed that you all can notice that stuff during class.
So I'll say part of the reason that I can, and I'll let others speak for that, is that one of my teaching techniques is I make eye contact with everybody as often as I can. So I'm always scanning the room. And what happens, create that accountability, that kind of, that courtesy norm. When I look at you, you look at me sort of thing. So that's one of the things that I do to try to engage my students. So I feel like I'm very in tune to what it is they're doing. Sometimes, though, this creates a bit of an issue because in my class on Monday, one of my students started to cry in the middle of class, right? And so I'm attending to her situation while teaching, and she was kind of, coughing into her sleeve and those kind of things. And at one point, it looked like she might go to throw up, but then she didn't. So I was like, what do I need to do for the student? Um, and she recovered. And this all happened in like a 30-second span. Right. So she seemed to recover. So class got over and I was like, hey, hold on for 1 sec, because another student comes, I want to talk to you for 1 sec. I was like, did I disturb you? Was there something like, and we were talking about aggression. So it was like, did the example get too intense or whatever it was? She's like, no, I get allergies. And I was trying really, really hard not to cough out loud and disrupt class. But what's happened is that was making her cry. And, she's trying so hard not to hold it in. She's holding in a sneeze or a cough. I thought it was holding in vomit. Like, so all of these kind of things. So the hyper attention to your students isn't always going to be an advantage, but that's why I kind of noticed that. Yeah. Yeah. Is it trauma or allergies, right? Those are two pretty big distinctions that could have been. And it was I'd never seen that student do that, but she said, I just respect the lecture. I didn't want to mess with you. And I was like, well, you didn't, but she absolutely did, but she was just trying to not cough. All right. So anyone else want to follow? I have more questions, more things to talk about it, but anyone have any additional comments kind of in that regard? Because we just hit an awkward silence. All right. Oh,
Not a
Rick, go ahead,
question.
Rick.
Not a
Yeah.
question. I mean, it's not a question yet. But as you're talking about hyperattention on the students, the line that keeps coming back to me is that line item from T-Vals. Um, does the teacher realize when students don't understand? Isn't that, doesn't that go to you? If the student's not actually saying, hey, I don't understand, doesn't that imply that you're supposed to be hyper attentive to the students to see, do they look confused?
Well, possibly. I think there are other ways to do that, like doing an informal learning check or something like that. There are other ways you could potentially do that. But yeah, I do think that is at least a cue to us that we should be paying some attention to our students and their learning. I think the way that we do it, whether we do it informally, kind of scanning their faces versus the exit tickets that kind of Carrie talked about earlier today, I think there's other ways we could potentially do that. But you're absolutely right, Rick. I think knowing what our students are going through is going to help us teach them for the most part. All right, so we got a couple minutes left. I want to know, we're in March. What's your go-to activity to get your students hyped up? What's your go-to activity to kind of get your students excited and engaged? Because I have a couple that I kind of keep in my back pocket. I have a couple that I build toward in my class, but I'm always looking to expand that toolkit. What are your go-tos?
So mine is like doing a version of speed dating, although I heard the term speed friending, which I like better, where you have one line of students and they talk to another and one stays still and the other moves. So you talk to a bunch of people in 2 minutes. If you're in a lecture hall with bolted in seats, it's really hard for that to work. But I don't teach that way, so I don't have an idea. Maybe somebody has an idea for that, but it's one-on-one, but they move and they talk to different people and there's a question and a prompt and you're going through it pretty quickly. And so I have yet to have it fail in terms of getting all of the students engaged and getting to know each other better. And it can be about absolutely anything. If it's a first day of class, it can be more of getting to know you things. If it's later on in the semester or even on the first day, it can be very content related and discussion related. So they tend to really enjoy that format of discussion instead of turn to the person next to you like turn to the person next to you is great for some reasons, but this and then they know who to talk to. Everybody has to talk and there's not that pressure to be, well, am I going to be the one to speak up or not speak up, or there's four of us here so I'm going to be quiet, or am I always the one saying something? Everybody has to talk the whole time, so it just kind of takes that pressure off of students because it's still one-on-one.
Excellent. I love that idea of speed friending. Yeah, I've never used the term speed dating in class because of the potential romantic connotations that kind of includes. I love speed friending as a term. What else do we have as the go-tos?
I think sometimes in my class, especially when they have a topic that's either has a lot of vocabulary or it's like they're running into a new topic altogether, I'll make a game out of it. And I often do something easy like making flashcards, and then they have to try to beat other teams in class. Like, how fast can you put these together or something? And at least that just gets the energy flowing at the beginning of class. And then we've got they can start talking to each other and stuff. So that seems to help a little bit. And I tend to do it like more and more as the semester goes on too.
That's fantastic.
I always like a good jigsaw activity where you have students working in groups and you give each group a specific, either some type of artifact that they have to work with or some topic that they have to explore. And then they work together, in whatever that is, and then divide up the groups, mix them up so that each member of the previous groups are then together in a new group. I always really like doing that. I feel like it really helps the dynamic of the class to do it periodically throughout the semester, so that they are really getting to interact with everyone and they get to all have their own expertise, because then they come together in the new groups and they have to share what their previous group did, or whatever, and they have to build new knowledge based on what the previous groups had done. And so it's just a nice way to like kind of bring that together. And the other big one I like doing is doing like a 10 top 10 top 5 top 3, where I'll have either individually or in pairs students come up with like a top 10 takeaway for a unit or something, and then get in bigger groups and come up with their collective top 5, and then as a whole class we do like, okay, what are our top 3 takeaways? It's a great way to review, and they always say things that I'm like, oh, I had kind of forgotten that we did that. Or like, oh, I like, a lot of times they'll like have glommed onto some throwaway comment that I made in class. I'm like, oh, okay, great. I'm glad that that worked for you.
So one of the things we're going to have is one of our next to last events. So we're going to have it the week before, the penultimate week of the semester. So the second to last week of the class. It's going to be called Rocking Your Last Class, and I'll talk about some activities that I do on the last day, et cetera. And one is the top 10 things you learned this semester. And like Andy, a lot of times that happens is the things that are on that list would be like a side comment or a tangent or a time I wrote on the board or something like that. And it often inspires me to make it a bigger part and a more specific part of the class next semester. And yes, penultimate is one of my favorite words once I learned the meaning of it. So yeah, I think it's really cool to kind of have that. I also love top 5 lists. And when I do any of these kind of things, one of the things that I find helps my students with engagement is I introduce a little bit of urgency. So if I want them to do a top 10 list, I might only give them 2 minutes. I might think they need 5, but I'm only going to give them 2 so they stay on task. But then when I have them share out, I only ask for 3. So I'm not going to embarrass anyone for not kind of getting it done or any of those kind of things. I'll say, now you all have 10, realizing they don't all have 10. And I just want to hear your top 3 as we share out. And what happens is I think the urgency kind of gears them up a little, kind of gets a little bit hyped into that event. We did one yesterday where they had to get together for 5 minutes to do a 1 minute group presentation. And they were on task, kind of with that, because we got 5 minutes before we're going to talk in front of everybody and this 1 minute summary of the observations we had done. I think sometimes just giving them that urgency is enough to get that engagement. Yeah, mostly we're the penultimate break week before spring break. That's excellent.
I like the
So,
urgency too, because I've had it where, like even in these games, some groups get done faster than others, and then you kind of kill their vibe because now they're going to get back on their phones instead of continue to talk
yeah,
to each other.
yeah. And that's what I was trying to do is I always give a little less than I think they need to try to prevent that as much as I can. And I also allow myself because I'm the one keeping time, right? So if I'm looking around like everyone only has 2, I can add time to that. Or if everyone's getting done early, I can say time's up. I've never had a student challenge and say, hey, wait, you didn't give us the whole 5 minutes or whatever, because they're involved in the task, they're not timing me. Um, Having said that, knock on wood, because later today that'll probably happen for the first time in my career because I said no one has ever challenged me on the timing. But speaking of timing, we're out of time. Um, I want to thank all of you for having this amazing conversation, because one of the things that gets me hyped up and gets me to keep my bubble going in the class is having conversations with all of you about these topics. Last week I couldn't be here because I was in Chicago at the Society of Personality Social Psych conference, and I presented at their teaching conference on some of my ideas related to teaching, and it just filled my cup. And now that I'm here with all of you, it's filling my cup again. So when I go into class later this afternoon, it's going to be awesome. And you're all going to be kind of co-authors of that bubble for me today. So thank you so much for that. Next week, we're going to have a event by Dr. Alex McVeigh on debate across the curriculum. He's one of our TLC fellows this year. I'm really excited for that. I'll remind you to please do that post-event survey. My colleague Jeff has dropped that into the chat. Our SOTO showcase is coming up pretty soon, so be looking for that. We'll probably drop the call for proposals maybe even next week. So we have something to kind of mull around in our heads before spring break. But if anyone has any questions about any of those things, please do let me know. But until next time, thank you for all that you do, including attending today. There's far too little gratitude in higher education. So I want to say that I see you, I recognize all of you, and thank you for being here. So have a great rest of your afternoon.